You think you know the Old West, the guns, the hats, the grit. But what if the real frontier looked nothing like the stories we've been sold? Behind every cowboy legend was a working man just trying to survive, not a hero out for glory. The hats were smaller, the holsters mismatched, and the shootouts almost never happened. From the dusty trails to the movie sets that replaced them, we're pulling back the curtain on 11 myths that turned practicality into legend, and showing how truth disappeared behind the smoke of spectacle. Myth 11, the 10-gallon Stetson. That iconic silhouette against the setting sun, wide-brimmed, perfectly shaped, towering like a monument to the frontier. It's burned into every cell of American mythology. It's also a costume that never made it past the theater door. The 1870s frontier was a place where wages came in dollars, not fantasies. A genuine Stetson cost more than 7 days of backbreaking labor. For working cowboys driving cattle across Texas or Wyoming, that mathematics didn't add up. Survival demanded cheaper solutions, and the range provided them in unglamorous abundance. Enter the bowler, the derby, squat, round, utterly unremarkable headwear that did something the towering Stetson couldn't. It stayed put. When you're chasing spooked cattle at full gallop, you need a hat that won't betray you to the wind. When you take a tumble, and every cowboy took tumbles, you need something that won't crumple into expensive garbage. But then Buffalo Bill's Wild West show transformed everything. Promoters understood that spectacle sold tickets. They dressed their performers in hats that caught stage lights like halos. Audiences didn't want to see practical gear. They wanted icons. They wanted symbols that could be sold back to them as America itself. And so the crown that working men never wore became the crown that defined them forever. Walk into any Western store today, and the shelves overflow with Stetsons. Meanwhile, the humble bowlers that actually survived the trail, they're ghosts, forgotten in the costume shadow of something that looked better in photographs than it ever worked in reality. The hat was just the beginning of Hollywood's reinvention. Myth 10, the matched gun leather set. Perfect symmetry. The holster flows seamlessly into the belt. Same maker, same hand tooling, same rich leather tones aged to identical perfection. It speaks of wealth, of care, of a man who respects his equipment. It also speaks of something that never existed outside traveling shows and prop departments. Frontier economics worked differently. You saved for months and bought a holster from a saddle maker in Colorado. 3 years later, passing through Texas, your belt finally broke and you replaced it with whatever the local leather shop had available. They didn't match because matching was a luxury that ranked somewhere below eating regularly and not dying of exposure. The Mexican loop holster succeeded precisely because it demanded nothing. Any belt worked. Any strap of leather could slide through that loop on the back and cinch tight. Adaptability was the innovation, the ability to make do with whatever you had, wherever you found yourself. Then the entertainers arrived and rewrote the rules. Buffalo Bill needed his star performers to shine under lantern light. He commissioned gun leather that matched, that gleamed, that announced to paying crowds, this is what the authentic West looks like. Hand-tooled designs, matching conchos, decorative silver spots that caught every eye in the theater. Audiences believed it. Early filmmakers copied it. And by the time Westerns dominated cinema, the coordinated gun leather rig had become historical fact in our collective imagination. Despite being pure theatrical fiction, every holster and belt combo you see on screen is an echo of that original deception, a beautiful lie that overwrote the mismatched practical reality of men who built their kits piece by piece, year by year, from whatever they could afford or find. But Hollywood's costume lies were nothing compared to their tactical inventions. Stick around, partner. We've still got more myths to bust and truths to uncover. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next ride through the real Wild West. Myth 9, the low-slung, fast-draw holster. The leather hangs low. The thong wraps around your thigh. locking everything in place. Your hand finds the grip with predatory certainty. This is speed weaponized. This is lethality refined to its purest form. This is also something that didn't exist until Hollywood prop masters needed their stars to look more dangerous. The Buscadero rig emerged from 1940s sound stages, not 1870s main streets. Directors faced a problem. How do you make gunfighters look faster on film? The solution was elegant and entirely fictional. Drop the holster from hip to thigh, add tie downs to prevent shift. Insert spring steel bands that held the mouth open so revolvers could begin rotating before clearing leather. Brilliant stagecraft, zero historical basis. Real frontier carry told a different story entirely. The Mexican loop rode high on the hip because cowboys lived on horseback. Reaching down to your thigh while mounted was awkward, slow, and invited your weapon to catch on saddle rigging. A high position kept your gun accessible, whether you were riding, walking, working cattle, or dealing with the thousand small emergencies that defined range life. Hollywood's invention looked so convincing that it created its own reality. Roy Rogers wore Buscadero rigs. John Wayne built a career on them. Generations of viewers absorbed these images as historical truth rather than costume fantasy. Now, modern fast-draw competitions use equipment that never existed in the actual Old West. The myth birthed genuine hardware. We practice techniques that frontier gunfighters never learned, celebrating speed draw methods they never needed, all because cinema's fiction was more compelling than history's truth. The holster lie leads directly to another fabrication about ammunition itself. Myth 8, the cartridge belt loop. Brass casings nestled in leather loops, gleaming like tiny soldiers standing at attention around your waist. 18 rounds of visible readiness, each bullet a promise and a threat. The image burned itself into Western iconography so deeply that questioning it feels like heresy. Post-Civil War, saddle makers saw opportunity when cartridge revolvers replaced cap and ball designs in the late 1860s. Why not stitch loops directly into belts? Ammunition within finger's reach, always visible, always ready. On paper, the concept was flawless. In practice, the frontier had other ideas. Rain turned brass green with corrosion. Dust infiltrated primers. Body sweat created rust blooms that could cause misfires. The loops exposed your ammunition to every element that could compromise its reliability. And reliability meant the difference between eating dinner and becoming dinner for scavengers. Experienced frontiersmen already knew the solution: small leather pouches attached to the belt, enclosed carriers that kept cartridges dry, clean, and protected. These weren't as photogenic as loops, but photography wasn't the goal. Survival was. The divide was clear. Newcomers and show performers wore looped belts because they looked impressive. Veterans who'd actually faced hostile situations stored their ammunition in pouches where it couldn't fail them. But cinema needed visual shorthand for armed and dangerous. Those gleaming loops provided it instantly. Every Western from the silent era forward burned this image into collective memory until the impractical became iconic and the practical was forgotten. Now the loops define our image of the frontier fighter, even though the real fighters knew better. Spectacle defeated sense. The camera loved what the battlefield would have killed. Fashion over function has never been more literal. Myth 7, the twin pistols. 2 revolvers, 2 holsters, twice the firepower strapped to your hips like artillery pieces. This is the image of the ultimate gunfighter. A man so dangerous, he needs dual systems to match his lethality. Strip away the romance, and you're looking at a tactical choice so specialized that most frontier men never made it. Working cowboys carried one gun, period. One Colt they knew intimately. One weapon they could field strip blindfolded, maintain in the dark, and trust with their lives. Dual carry wasn't standard equipment. It was specialized insurance for men heading into situations where ammunition capacity mattered more than comfort. The backup principle made tactical sense in specific contexts. Single-action revolvers required methodical reloading. Open the gate, rotate the cylinder, punch out each spent case, insert fresh rounds individually. In sustained combat, that process invited death. A second gun eliminated the vulnerability. Fire 6, transition, fire 6 more while enemies scrambled to reload their own weapons. But consider the cost. Twice the weight pulling down your belt after 12 hours in the saddle. Twice the maintenance. Twice the financial burden. Most working cowboys couldn't justify any of it. Their daily threats came from weather, injury, and exhausted cattle, not sustained gunfights requiring backup weapons. Then Hollywood made the choice for everyone. Twin guns became the visual signature of the serious gunfighter. One gun marked you as ordinary, two guns marked you as legend. The mathematical logic was backwards. Real gunfighters minimized weight and complexity, but cinema doesn't deal in practicality. So dual carry became synonymous with frontier danger, despite being extraordinarily rare. The exception consumed the rule, and now we believe the unusual was universal. Speaking of where weapons actually were, Mith 6, the ever-present hip holster, armed every moment, the revolver as constant companion. Man and weapon fused into a single entity that walked, worked, and slept ready for violence. This romantic notion collapses under the weight of actual frontier labor. Cowboys worked brutally, endlessly, in conditions that had no patience for unnecessary equipment. Branding calves near open fire while a heavy revolver slapped against your hip and caught on ropes. Mending fence lines for hours while that same gun bruised your hip bone with every stretch and bend. The math was simple. Most tasks went faster and easier without the weapon. Rifles told a different story. Your Winchester lived in a saddle scabbard, protected from the elements, always within reach when mounted, and completely removable for groundwork. This flexibility defined practical carry. The innovation wasn't keeping weapons on you constantly. It was knowing when to have them and when to set them aside. Sidearms got tucked into saddlebags during work details. They stayed in camp when you were riding fence alone. They emerged when you needed to put down an injured animal or deal with predators. The rest of the time, which was most of the time, they were just dead weight, dragging down a belt that had better uses. Hollywood couldn't accept this reality. Heroes needed to be perpetually armed because unarmed heroes looked vulnerable. Vulnerable heroes didn't sell tickets, so every Western from 1903 forward shows cowboys constantly armed, danger perpetually imminent, violence always seconds away. But some carry methods did exist, and we credited them to the wrong century. Mith 5, the shoulder holster's modern birth. Concealed beneath your coat, the revolver rests against your ribs. Your hand finds it with practiced ease, drawing across your chest in one fluid motion. This carry method supposedly belongs to 20th century detectives and 1980s television cops. History has other ideas. Frontier towns weren't lawless, they were becoming civilized, and civilization brought regulations. Tombstone posted ordinances, Dodge City enforced rules, visible firearms on Main Street violated local law. But threats didn't disappear just because signs prohibited weapons. Men adapted by hiding what they couldn't display. The cross-draw shoulder rig solved multiple problems simultaneously. Gamblers spending 10 hours at card tables couldn't access hip holsters while seated. Undercover lawmen couldn't advertise their profession with visible iron. Traveling merchants needed protection that didn't announce itself. The shoulder holster provided complete concealment, paired with accessibility from any position. This wasn't modern innovation. This was 1870s problem solving, documented in photographs and written accounts that historians later had to excavate from beneath layers of assumption. When Miami Vice made shoulder holsters cool in 1984, everyone believed they were watching cutting-edge tactical development. They were actually watching history repeat itself a century late. Now we've recovered the truth. Concealed carry isn't new. The frontier explored every possible method of hiding weapons while keeping them accessible. We didn't invent tactical concealment. We just renamed it and claimed credit for techniques our ancestors had already perfected. Equipment myths pale beside our misconceptions about violence itself. Myth 4, the high noon showdown. 2 men, 1 street, hands hovering. The town holds its breath. Time crystallizes into this single moment where speed determines survival. This scene has played out in hundreds of films, thousands of television episodes. It happened in real life perhaps a dozen times across 3 decades of frontier history. Most frontier violence was chaotic, close and ugly. Drunken brawls in poorly lit saloons, ambushes from shadows, sudden explosions of rage that ended before participants fully understood what was happening. The organized, face-to-face, draw-when-ready encounter was so rare that when it did occur, it became instant legend, not because it was common, but because it was extraordinary. The OK Corral gunfight is famous precisely because it was exceptional. It violated every norm of frontier violence. It happened in daylight, with witnesses. It involved multiple participants who all knew what was about to happen. It occurred in a public space with clear lines of engagement. These factors made it noteworthy, which made it documented, which made it immortal in our cultural memory. Meanwhile, the mechanisms that actually prevented violence, gun control ordinances requiring visitors to surrender firearms at the city limits, peace officers who maintained order through law rather than combat, and communities that punished violence rather than celebrating it. These received no theatrical treatment. Dime novels needed excitement. Buffalo Bill needed drama. Cinema needed action. The rare became standard. The exception became the rule. And now we have an entire genre built on events that almost never happened, celebrating violence that actual frontier communities worked desperately to prevent. Thousands of peaceful days vanished from memory. Dozens of shootouts defined history. The duel that never happened became more real than the peace that actually existed. This leads to perhaps the most fundamental misunderstanding. Myth 3, the lawless, violent West. Anarchy at civilization's edge. Violence as the default language. Law is something that existed everywhere except here, in this wild space where men made their own rules. This image of the frontier persists. Despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary, settlers pushing across the plains in the 1860s didn't flee order. They carried it with them. In the absence of federal government, communities formed cattlemen's associations, miners' courts, and private organizations to arbitrate disputes and enforce norms. The innovation wasn't chaos. It was improvised civilization, emerging from necessity rather than authority. Town marshals confiscated weapons. Mayors enforced ordinances. Citizens formed committees that adjudicated property disputes without firing a shot. Some historians now argue convincingly that frontier towns were statistically safer than many modern American cities. The data supports them, even if our mythology doesn't. But data doesn't sell newspapers. Exceptional violence does. When a bank robbery happened, rare as it was, Eastern publishers ran the story for weeks. When a shooting occurred, extraordinary as that was, dime novelists turned it into serialized entertainment. Thousands of peaceful days went unreported because peace is boring. Exceptional violence got reported, republished, and eventually accepted as typical rather than unusual. Buffalo Bill weaponized these rare events into entertainment. Cinema inherited his playbook, and now Wild West means lawlessness in our language, despite the historical West being defined by communities desperately trying to establish order. The chaos that never was became shorthand for an era actually characterized by ordinary people building schools, churches, courts, and the mundane infrastructure of civilization. We remember the outlaws. We forget the lawyers who outnumbered them 100 to 1. Yet our equipment myths and violence myths pale beside our erasure of who was actually there. Myth 2. The Lone White Gunslinger. Picture the cowboy in your mind. See him clearly. Now recognize that the image you're seeing is a lie built on strategic forgetting and market-driven narrative choices that erased more history than they preserved. Up to 1/4 of working cowboys were black, many formerly enslaved men who found freedom and wages on the range. The first genuine cowboys were Mexican vaqueros and Spanish caballeros, who invented the skills, terminology, and traditions that Anglo cowboys later adopted wholesale. Native Americans worked ranches, Chinese immigrants cooked for trail drives. The frontier was a multiracial enterprise that our mythology has deliberately whitewashed. Cattle drives required crews of 12 or more, each person fulfilling specialized roles: trail boss navigating, cook maintaining morale, wranglers handling horses, flankers controlling the herd's sides, drag riders eating dust at the rear. Nobody survived alone. Success demanded teamwork, shared knowledge, and mutual dependence. Around campfires at night, these diverse crews shared stories in multiple languages, sang songs from different traditions, and formed bonds that transcended the racial divisions of the broader society. Then dime novels needed heroes marketable to Eastern audiences. Hollywood needed stars that matched audience expectations. The rich complexity got simplified into profitable mythology. Black cowboys vanished from the narrative. Mexican vaqueros became villains or disappeared entirely. Native Americans became obstacles rather than co-workers. Generations absorbed this revised history as truth. Only now are historians excavating the full story from beneath layers of deliberate erasure, discovering that the real West was more diverse, more complex, and frankly more interesting than the monochromatic myth. But the single biggest lie wasn't about equipment, violence, or identity. It was about occupation itself. Myth 1. Cowboys were professional gunfighters. Strip away every Hollywood fantasy and confront the bedrock reality. Cowboys were not gunfighters. They were not hired killers. They were not men who solved problems with bullets. They were ranch hands, laborers, working men whose job was cattle, not combat. Your day started at 4 a.m. and ended after sunset. Those 16 hours involved herding livestock, repairing infrastructure, branding calves, breaking horses, and maintaining equipment in harsh conditions that had zero patience for incompetence. Your revolver stayed in your saddlebag. You might fire it to mercy kill an injured animal. You might go months without drawing it at all. Worth to a ranch was measured in skills that had nothing to do with violence. Could you rope a running steer? Could you read terrain and find water? Could you work all day in killing heat or freezing cold without complaint? Could you handle a 1,000-pound animal with patience rather than brutality? These questions determined employment. Speed with a sidearm never entered the equation. The gunfighter was a completely separate profession, rare, specialized, and utterly distinct from cowboy work. But Buffalo Bill's Wild West show needed dramatic rescues and trick shooting. Dime novels needed heroes who solved problems with bullets. Early cinema needed action sequences. So two different occupations got merged into one in our imagination. So the gun that fired occasionally for practical purposes became the gun that defined the profession. The weapon that was a tool became the weapon that was an identity, and the working men who built the West disappeared beneath the myth of the gunfighters who supposedly tamed it. If you enjoyed tearing down the myths of the Old West, make sure you subscribe. We've got plenty more stories where this one came from.